The confrontation between the United States and China could affect not only the economies of these two countries, but the entire world. This applies to everything from oil prices to the electronics we use every day. And this is not just a theory, but a reality that will affect each of us. China recently imposed new duties on American goods as a response to the 10% tariffs imposed by the United States on all Chinese imports. Over the years, the United States and China have built one of the most powerful economic partnerships in history. Chinese factories produced goods from iPhones to car parts, and American farmers and technology companies sold billions of dollars worth of goods to Chinese consumers. But now this system is collapsing before our eyes. The multi-billion-dollar partnership between the two giants has been badly shaken, and its possible collapse will lead to serious consequences. In this context, Donald Trump seems to be looking for an alternative, aiming to strengthen relations with India in order to weaken China's influence. Recently, the Indian Prime Minister met with Trump and Elon Musk at the White House to consolidate this alliance. If India moves closer to the United States, it could destabilize not only China, but the entire BRICS bloc, putting its members in front of an important choice. But what is really behind this conflict, and how will it affect your wallet, work, and global trade? Let's figure it out. To begin with, over the years, the United States and China have forged a powerful trade partnership that defines the rules of global trade. In 2022, the trade turnover between the two countries reached a record $690 billion. At that time, American exports to China totaled $154 billion, while imports from China rose to $537 billion. This has reinforced China's role as a major supplier of consumer goods and a crucial market for American industry. However, this thriving trade relationship changed in 2018, when the Trump administration imposed massive tariffs on Chinese imports in an attempt to address trade deficits and intellectual property issues. In response, China imposed its own duties on American goods, and a series of mutual sanctions began. By 2024, the consequences were clear. Total trade between the two countries dropped to $582 billion, U.S. exports to China declined, and imports from China declined. In 2 years, the United States lost $10 billion in exports, but China had an even harder time. Its sales in the United States collapsed by $100 billion. Both countries were losers, but the consequences for them were different. In early 2025, Donald Trump announced a 10% tariff increase on all Chinese imports, increasing pressure on Beijing. In response, China immediately imposed a 5% tariff on American coal, liquefied natural gas, and a 10% tariff on crude oil and agricultural machinery. This has further exacerbated industrial tensions and reduced the trade deficit. The exchange of economic blows has not only affected bilateral trade, but also disrupted global supply chains, forcing companies around the world to rethink their strategies in the face of uncertainty in global markets. However, tariffs are just the tip of the iceberg. One of the most significant changes has been how multinational corporations have adapted their supply chains to reduce the risks associated with the strained relations between the United States and China. The countries that have benefited the most from this are Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore, which have become alternative manufacturing centers. Vietnam, especially, has significantly increased its share of exports to the United States and has become an important player in global trade. Malaysia and Singapore have also taken advantage of the situation, strengthening their positions in the global economy. By 2024, the volume of U.S. imports from Vietnam has grown to $136 billion, an increase of 19% over the previous year. At first glance, it seems that the United States is strengthening trade ties with small Asian countries, but this only underscores the scale of the changes taking place in the global economy. These global changes affect each of us, because the consequences for prices, goods, and services that we use will be felt all over the world. There is an interesting catch in the global trade war between the United States and China. Many Chinese manufacturers are beginning to quietly shift production to Vietnam, using this country as a loophole to circumvent American tariffs and rising costs. This process is particularly noticeable in the electronics sector. Vietnam's exports to the United States have increased dramatically. At first glance, it seems that Vietnam is benefiting from this situation, But in fact, a significant part of this production remains under the control of Chinese companies, which complicates the picture of a global trade war. But Vietnam is not the only one benefiting from these changes. Malaysia is also experiencing a surge in trade with the United States as companies redirect their supply chains to the country. Trade tensions between the US and China have prompted companies to rethink their supply chains, opting for countries such as Malaysia. But this restructuring has not been without problems. The turn towards the Malaysian market has led to increased competition and reduced profitability, as these markets are not as large as the Chinese one. Increased competition has led to price wars between Chinese companies, which in turn has reduced profitability. There is also a possibility of political discontent in the countries hosting the new business. However, the trade war has affected more than just supply chains. The conflict has also provoked a full-scale technological race, especially in the field of semiconductors, where the United States is trying its best to block China's access to advanced chips. By banning the export of advanced computer and semiconductor technologies to China, the United States has forced Beijing to accelerate the development of its own microchip production. Chinese companies such as SMIC have already achieved notable success in the production of 7 nanometers, despite significant difficulties associated with limited access to American technology. This progress demonstrates China's determination to achieve technological independence in critical industries, despite trade restrictions. Meanwhile, China is developing several strategies to retaliate against the United States, and Beijing's goals are causing serious concern. Now the most interesting thing begins, friends. We are listening carefully. One of the key tools is to increase tariffs on strategically important American exports. But it's not limited to tariffs. China is also using its global dominant role in supply chains to create new leverage. For example, China controls rare earths, vital minerals used in advanced electronics, renewable energy systems, and military technology. Although China has not completely banned the export of these minerals to the United States, it has increased regulation and introduced quotas, which limits access and increases the cost. Such tactics show that China's control over key resources can be a strong bargaining chip in trade disputes. But it's not just about minerals. China is also rebuilding its food supply, being the world's largest importer of soybeans. He is drastically reducing his dependence on American farmers, shifting his focus to Brazil. Back in 2016, Brazil accounted for only 46% of Chinese soybean imports, but today this figure has grown to 74%. This growth is China's direct response to the trade war with the United States. Beijing is seeking to diversify its suppliers in order to protect itself from geopolitical risks. Brazil, with its vast agricultural lands and generous government incentives, quickly took advantage of this situation and consolidated its status as a leading supplier of soybeans to China. However, it's not just about food security, it's a big geopolitical game. By deepening trade ties with Latin America, China is increasing its influence in a region that has long been under U.S. control. A similar situation is observed in the energy sector. China is actively entering into long-term agreements with key energy suppliers, which allows it to reduce its dependence on the United States. One of the most significant deals is the 30-year natural gas supply agreement with Russia, which ensures stable energy supplies through the power of Siberia pipeline. In addition, China has signed a $60 billion deal with Qatar to supply liquefied natural gas, further strengthening its energy security. In response to the sanctions imposed by the United States, China announced the introduction of 15% duties on coal and liquefied natural gas coming from the United States. These agreements reduce China's dependence on the American energy market, which in turn protects it from possible geopolitical shocks and sanctions. But perhaps the most ambitious part of the Chinese strategy is the pursuit of technological independence. The Made in China 2025 program is a large-scale government project aimed at leadership in high-tech industries, including semiconductor manufacturing. Previously, China depended on American companies for advanced microchips and mission-critical technologies. But after the U.S. imposed export restrictions on Huawei and other Chinese giants, Beijing responded with multi-billion-dollar investments in its own chip production. Leading state-owned companies and private investors are actively developing the domestic semiconductor market using government finance, acquisitions, and cutting-edge research. If this program is successful, China can become a global leader in the field of semiconductors, challenging the dominance of the United States. By deepening its ties with countries such as Brazil, Russia, and Qatar, China is creating a more stable economic structure that is less influenced by the United States. Now the question is how the United States will respond. Will they be able to regain their positions, or will China retain the new economic reality? The effects of the trade war are already being felt in various sectors of the U.S. economy. Farmers, technology companies, and ordinary consumers are among the main victims. American farmers in agricultural regions of the United States, such as Iowa and Nebraska, were most affected. Farm bankruptcies have increased dramatically in the midst of the trade war. The reason is that China was the largest buyer of American agricultural products. When this market closed, farmers lost stable incomes. Finding new customers is a time-consuming task. These are not only debts, but also new quality standards, export barriers, and political factors. Even if new markets are found, it will take years, if not decades, to fully compensate for the losses. The technology sector has also not been left out. Companies such as Qualcomm, whose reputation is based on cutting-edge developments in telecommunications and semiconductors, have begun to actively develop cooperation with China. This is not just a temporary trend, but a global shift in market dynamics that disrupts the traditional system of transnational supply chains. To counter these problems, the U.S. government has passed the CHIP Act, which provides for significant investments in domestic semiconductor manufacturing. This program is designed to reduce dependence on foreign markets and preserve the technological leadership of American companies. And so, in the midst of worsening relations between China and the United States, Donald Trump is betting on strengthening partnership with India as a response in the struggle for influence. On February 13, 2025, President Trump met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House. This was not just another diplomatic meeting, but part of Trump's larger strategy to strengthen ties with India and contain China. The timing of the visit was also important, as it coincided with the moment when Trump announced new retaliatory tariffs. These tariffs are intended to punish countries that impose high taxes on American goods, and this applies to both China and India. A priority for Trump was India's proposal to purchase large amounts of oil and gas from the United States. After all, the United States has significantly more hydrocarbon resources than any other country in the world. During the meeting, Trump and Modi discussed several important issues, including defense, trade, and technological partnership. One of the most high-profile moments was the U.S. offer to sell advanced F-35 fighter jets to India. This deal could significantly strengthen India's military capabilities and help it stand up to China in the region. The two leaders also talked about the quadrilateral partnership between the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, which aims to contain Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Thus, Trump is using a carrot-and-stick strategy. On the one hand, Washington is offering military support to India, and on the other hand, it is forcing India to reconsider its trade policy. Now the whole world will be closely watching how these steps will affect the balance of power in Asia. But what will India's reaction be? Will it soften its position under pressure from Washington, or will it continue to maneuver between the two global economic giants? Friends, now I would like to express my opinion about the material. To be honest, the whole topic of confrontations, trade wars, and constant struggle for influence is not close to me at all. It seems to me that this whole world, where countries must constantly be on the lookout and compete with each other, creating tension and instability, is not what we should strive for. Instead of sitting on suitcases and preparing for economic sanctions, the world could work in harmony, using its resources and knowledge to make people's lives better, not more difficult. This whole game of geopolitical muscle is far from what inspires me. I sincerely hope for a world where issues such as trade barriers and the impact on the global economy will give way to cooperation and mutual understanding. A world where technology can be developed peacefully, knowledge can be shared, and people can be cared for, rather than being used as pawns in international games. Tired of all these conflicts and ambitions because in the end, what do we really lose? Peace, stability, and confidence in the future. This is something that should be a priority, not the destruction or undermining of economies for the sake of a few strategic gains. On the one hand, China is strengthening ties with Russia, Brazil, and the Middle East, and on the other, Trump is trying to win India over to the United States. Isn't this the beginning of a final split between the world's two largest economies? How will this change the global trading system? Share your thoughts in the comments. In order not to miss new interesting videos, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. Thanks for your attention, friends. See you in the next video.